Hey there, Jordan Sheridan. It is Tuesday, April 17th. April 17th, a little cloudy here in New York. Lot to discuss. Lot to discuss. It's going to be a fun broadcast. Hopefully, nothing crazy happens during this broadcast. Let's make sure we're up and live on the YouTube, which has been growing very quickly, thankfully. Okay, are we live on YouTube? Here we go. We are live on YouTube. So, as you can see, if you missed my live stream yesterday, I have a little bit of a new setup. This is the beginnings of the media revolution. So behind me, I made this in arts and crafts class. This is the sign for my Patreon. You could go there. I have my podcasts live on Patreon. I'm doing 2 podcasts a week. So I interview activists, political candidates, water protectors, all of that. I also do a second podcast every week just for patrons. So one of them is free. One of them is only for patrons. I also do video diaries that are giving you a little bit more of the behind the scenes. So I hope you'll consider checking out my Patreon. I will tell you what we're at right this second. Hold on one second. We are at, on the Patreon, 311 patrons at $17.50 a month. 311 patrons at $17.50 a month. And as I've been saying for a while now, this Patreon is actually going to become the Patreon for the media network I'm trying to launch. If you didn't see my interview with Jimmy Dore, which went up, I believe, on Friday, I announced the name of the network that I will be hopefully launching by summer. We're currently trying to get investors. Part of getting investors is building up that patron. So I definitely appreciate the over 300 people that have now paid as subscribers on Patreon. The name of the network, here we go, if you don't know, Status Coup. Status Coup. So that's what we're trying to do here. We need a status coup, a journalistic coup d'etat of the status quo in this country. So that's what I'm trying to build. I'm going to try and hire other reporters to join me. We're going to get in the field to cover corruption, to cover environmental genocide, to cover police brutality and the economic terrorism being perpetrated against minorities in this country, specifically black men and women. We are going to cover everything we can on the local and state level that is being ignored by a corrupt corporate media. And part of that corrupt corporate media is my first story of the day. So once again, it's right behind me, arts and crafts class, put it together with duct tape. So the ground level of this media revolution is not going to look pretty, but I like to keep it raw and honest. So a lot of stories going on. Obviously, the corporate media is fixating. Stormy Daniels was on The View this morning, and now there's like a sketch out of the man she claims threatened her years ago. Oh yes, Jen, by the way, my business partner, is in the chat. That Patreon, that money's not going directly to me. That money is going to hire reporters, that money is going for equipment, and it's going to pay my business partner as well. So yes, that money is not just for me. I'm actually taking very little of it, to be honest. So as the media fixates on Stormy Daniels, and there's now a mugshot for somebody who supposedly threatened her years ago, I have some stories. I'm going hard today on MSNBC, my former employer. If you don't know, I worked at MSNBC back in the day. But I really think the news that's out about MSNBC is, if any one of the 91 watching right now, and please press the share button, get this out to more people, if any one of you had a glimmer of hope for MSNBC, this should put it away. So, Ed Schultz, he is a broadcaster. He's now on RT America. So obviously he's a foreign agent, because everybody from RT America is a foreign agent. Ed Schultz used to be an anchor at MSNBC. When I worked at MSNBC, he was there. I used to be in the newsroom, and I would hear him on set. He was one of the few, I would say, was actually progressive at MSNBC. He brought on Bernie Sanders to his program more than just about anyone. He covered Bernie Sanders very much. They fired him at the time. He had a really highly rated show, but they fired him. My thoughts are because he was covering the TPP and how terrible the TPP was. So Ed Schultz is now at RT America. So he did an interview on somebody's show, and he basically exposed the kind of censorship that MSNBC put on him, particularly to make sure that Bernie Sanders was not covered. You ready for this? So you could tell your neoliberal auntie or neoliberal uncle who watches Rachel Maddow what MSNBC is really about? Listen to this part of the interview from Ed Schultz. Oh, excuse me.
And I hope your audience consumes this. There was more oversight and more direction given to me on content at MSNBC than there ever has been here at RT. And I think that it's very sad that that story is not getting out. I think it's many times I was told what to lead with on MSNBC. Many times I was told what I was not going to do, and I've got a story that had I not been involved in it, I would have never believed it. And Phil Griffin, who I consider a friend to this day, was a watchdog, far more than anything I'm exposed to here at RT America.
Did he tell you what to say? Did he tell you an angle to take?
Often. In fact, when Bernie Sanders was announcing that he was going to be a candidate for the nomination of the Democratic Party in Burlington, Vermont, I was the only cable host between Fox, MSNBC, and CNN that was there live to cover it. Now, there were live cameras there, but we had coordinated with the Sanders campaign that at 5 o'clock he was going to make his announcement, and we were going to cover this on the Ed Show. I go to Bernie Sanders' house that afternoon, an interview in the backyard, about a 15-minute interview. The grandkids are running around. It's a big day for the Sanders family. He's going to announce that he's running for president. We're going to carry it live later on in the day, and we're going to run this one-on-one tape with Bernie. 3,000 people are there on Lake Champlain. It's 5 minutes to air, and I get a phone call from Phil Griffin. You're not covering this. I said, Phil, Bernie Sanders is announcing he's running for president. He's going to be a president. I don't care. You're not covering this. And it got rather contentious. And now you're asking me for opinion. I'm giving you fact right now about what happened. And other people who were there with me will attest to the fact and back me up that this is what happened. We were told that we had to cover something down in Texas that was totally meaningless, and another press conference in Baltimore, which was already had been in the news for a few days. We're covering Bernie Sanders live. We're coordinated with his campaign. And I'm told 5 minutes before, you're not covering Bernie Sanders. Now, let me give you the opinion. I think the Clintons were connected to Andy Lack, connected at the hip. I think that they didn't want anybody in their prime time or anywhere in their lineup supporting Bernie Sanders. I think that they were in the tank for Hillary Clinton, and I think it was managed, and 45 days later I was out at MSNBC. And I thought it stunk. They gave me my contract. I signed a...
I'm going to play the rest of it, but I just want to interject there. So, Ed Schultz, follow the sequence here. Ed Schultz, Keith Olbermann used to be the main person at MSNBC. Nowadays, he's lost his mind and he's a Russiagate hysterical man. But he used to be the primetime guy at MSNBC. When I first started paying attention to politics in the mid-2000s, I watched Keith Olbermann. He was a brilliant, brilliant source of opposition against George W. Bush and the Iraq War and all those things. And he came off truly progressive. I was back then a lot less cynical and I was a lot more naive than I am now. Now, so when Keith Olbermann left in 2011, they put Lawrence O'Donnell on at 8 o'clock. And just so you know, because I worked in cable news, 8 o'clock is really, really like the prime time real estate in corporate media. You know, that's where you get the high advertising dollars during the commercials and all those things. So they put Lawrence O'Donnell at 8 o'clock and they put Ed Schultz on at 10 p.m. Lawrence O'Donnell, his ratings weren't so great, so they switched Ed from 10 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and they put Lawrence from 8. They demoted Lawrence to 10 o'clock and put Ed at 8 o'clock. Ed got the best ratings on the network since Keith Olbermann left. Ed Schultz at 8 o'clock. He had much higher ratings than Lawrence O'Donnell did at 8 o'clock. And he was, you know, Ed is a bomb thrower, or he was a bomb thrower. He would go ballistic, and I enjoyed watching him, if I'm being honest. So strangely, even though Ed's ratings were really, really good, for some reason they moved Ed Schultz out of 8 o'clock primetime and put Chris Hayes in at 8 o'clock. So Chris Hayes was on the weekend. Ed Schultz was at 8 o'clock. Ed Schultz is doing really, really well at 8 o'clock. But for some reason, they put Chris Hayes in at 8 o'clock. And eventually, they put Ed Schultz on at 5 o'clock. Well, why would you do that? Why would you move the person who's getting the highest ratings? Ratings equal higher prices you could charge your advertisers during commercials. So the higher your ratings, the more you could charge for your advertising. It's not complicated. Why would they move Ed Schultz? Was it because at 8 o'clock he had Bernie Sanders on as a guest too much? Is it because he was a little too pro-union? At 8 o'clock? Remember, NBC used to be owned by General Electric. Now it's owned by Comcast. Comcast has been heavily behind ending net neutrality. That's why you don't really see it covered on NBC that much. Comcast is a mega corporation. They lobby the federal government for all sorts of tax subsidies and deregulation. They're not in the pro-union camp. They're not fond of an anchor saying that NAFTA has been terrible for the United States, or an anchor against the TPP. So all of a sudden, Ed Schultz moves to 5 o'clock, even though his ratings were very, very high. And Chris Hayes, who used to, I would say, when he wrote at The Nation, was fairly progressive, I thought, back in the day. But as my friend Jimmy Dore, who, by the way, I can't thank enough for having me on his show. Again, I was on his program. I think it was posted on Friday night, so you go check out our interview. Tomorrow, I'm going to be on Jamal Thomas's show, The Progressive Soapbox, 5 o'clock Eastern, live. I'm going on Jamal's show tomorrow. So, yeah, why would they put a book nerd in at 8 o'clock when you had Ed Schultz, who was doing phenomenally well in the ratings? I think we know why. Because Chris Hayes would basically toe the corporate line. And now Chris Hayes, if you watch him, I don't watch him, is kind of a shell of his former self. He basically leads with Russia. He leads with Trump and basically fixates on bullshit. If you remember, Susan Sarandon, who, if you watch my video posted earlier, Susan Sarandon is now being blamed by the Democratic Party for the Syria airstrikes. Oh, look. This is why we need more patrons, so I can get a little bit more expensive duct tape. This is how we do it. This is the ground level of the media revolution. It'll probably fall 5 other times. Make sure you clip that out so we could send it out. Jordan, he's fallen from such great heights to having duct tape and a makeshift studio in his poorly lit studio. But it's the content that matters. It's the content that matters. As I kindly ask you to consider supporting me so I can get back in the field. But basically the point is, MSNBC is not a progressive news organization. MSNBC is a mouthpiece for the Democratic establishment. When Hillary Clinton lost to an orange orangutan doofus as our president, instead, if you're a progressive organization, maybe you would start to cover the toxic effects of money in politics. Maybe you would start to cover, maybe NAFTA really did do a lot of damage to the United States, particularly the Midwest region. Maybe the TPP is not so good. Maybe we should start having different guests on than, David Corn and Eugene Robinson. And maybe we should try new hosts. We've had Chris Matthews on for 250 years. Maybe we should start looking into why did the most experienced, as they said, candidate in American history lose to a game show host. But they didn't do that. MSNBC latched on to the Russiagate stuff. And I've said all along, I have no problem with a criminal investigation into whether Donald Trump's campaign worked with the Russian government to hack emails and distribute them. If he did, that should be investigated. If the Trump campaign and Russia actually did collude, there should be penalty for that. I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with, if you watch Rachel Maddow right now, I don't know what is more deranged, Rachel Maddow today or Glenn Beck back in the day when he had the red phone on Fox News. Remember that? Because Rachel Maddow, watching her right now, I don't think she's drunk. But I think she's lost it. She's lost it. Because when I started watching MSNBC back in the day, I used to love Rachel Maddow because every single other anchor would be starting the program with the same story. And then Rachel Maddow would just start with some random story I've never heard of from Idaho. That's what Rachel Maddow was known for. Presenting stuff that other people weren't covering, which is what I'm passionate about. I want to get back in the field to do that. But Rachel Maddow is basically now, literally, she's having a Cold War reenactment live on air. And they criticize Ed Schultz for being on RT America, which, by the way, I've seen better coverage on RT America about the Flint water crisis and the Syrian airstrikes than I do on CNN and MSNBC. So if they're an agent of the Russian government, I don't care. They're doing good news. Are some programs on RT more the Russian government line? Maybe. I don't watch it all day. But the segments I have seen, like Lee Camp, are what U.S. media should be like. So let's play the rest of the Ed Schultz clip.
A non-disclosure agreement and also a no bad-mouthing agreement, which I felt good with because I thought that this was over time all going to wash out, and I knew if Bernie Sanders didn't win, he was going to run again because the man is determined. So I was patient and took my money and went on, but the fact of the matter is I think I've got a hell of a story to tell. And when you see how the campaign unfolded, Donna Brazile feeding Hillary Clinton questions at the campaign, the DNC undercutting Bernie Sanders, the super delegates that were organized by Hillary Clinton. In my state of Minnesota, where I'm a resident and pay taxes, Al Franken and Amy Klobuchar were super delegates, and despite the fact that Bernie Sanders won Minnesota, they supported Clinton. It was the fix was in. The fix was in with the mainstream media. The fix was in with managing the news and shutting down Bernie Sanders. And it wasn't until he started matching the Clintons and raising money that he became, well, we got to cover this guy. But from the start, the Clintons didn't want any competition. They didn't want Bernie Sanders around. They didn't want the Keystone XL pipeline. They didn't want to push her on that issue. They didn't want to push her on free education for all, and they certainly didn't want to push her on the TPP and also universal health care. Those were four main issues that Bernie Sanders, had he not been in the campaign, Hillary Clinton would have never had to address. And so I think the fix was in early on to Deep Six Bernie. To this day, it kind of pisses me off. Because, they talk about collusion. There's nothing more than collusion than this.
Well, let me go and a little bit and talk a little bit more about Trump.
Sure.
And I'm sure that you've seen kind of what some of the things you said at MSNBC about Trump. One time,
Wow. Give it to him, Ed Schultz. Give it to him. I mean, I don't really know if I need to add anything more. Ed Schultz literally just told you that do you know, by the way, for a cable news crew, it's not cheap. They sent Ed Schultz, producers of his, technical people of his, editors of his, up to Burlington, Vermont, to be the first, to be there live as Bernie made his announcement that he was running for president. I think Bernie had, at that point, like 5,000 people in that attendance in Vermont. And then 5 minutes, and Ed did like a sit-down interview with him for 15 minutes at his home. And you have the president of MSNBC calling you 5 minutes before you to go live, saying, you're not going to cover this. And I just want to show you, Ed didn't mention this, but MSNBC is so corrupt. Look at this. In 2015, Comcast, the parent company of MSNBC, one of the vice presidents at Comcast is holding a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton. They're not even hiding it. Comcast Executive Vice President David L. Cohen will host a fundraising event at his home with Hillary Clinton on June 26th. Philadelphia Inquirer obtained a copy of the invitation, which prices tickets at the bargain basement, $2,700 per person. The event will take place from 11:30 to 1:30. I mean, you can't make this shit up. You can't make this up. And I think Ed made such an important point. And full disclosure, I really like Ed Schultz. I really liked him at MSNBC. I don't even know if I get RT actually here, so I haven't seen him on RT. I encourage you, check him out. I think he's great. But he made the point that you will never hear on Rachel Maddow, that you will never hear on Chris Hayes, that you will never hear on CNN or in the pages of the New York Times, or frankly on some independent media programs. You want to talk about collusion? The real collusion that affected the election was between the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign. The real collusion that affected the election was between the Barack Obama administration and the Hillary Clinton campaign, which WikiLeaks showed. Black Film Guild said, Jordan, I want to donate during the live stream. Can you enable donations? Oh, Black Film Guild, I wish I could. Unfortunately, the only way to have a super chat where people could donate right in the chat, is if I'm monetized on YouTube. And for some strange reason, YouTube hasn't monetized me yet. Go figure, right? Go figure. My business partner, Jen, has been basically harassing YouTube very gently so that we could get this channel monetized. We're about to hit 11,000 subscribers in less than 2 months, by the way. Full disclosure, we did get a bump thanks to my friend Jimmy Dore, so thanks, Jimmy. But no, you can't donate right here in the chat until I have that enabled. So hopefully that will happen soon. You can go right there. $1 a month, $2 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month. Thank you to everyone who's been subscribing. This is not for me. It's called Jordan Sheridan Reports. I am paying the people helping me. Jen, we have an editor doing these videos. Pretty soon we're going to be introducing a new face to do live reporting on this channel. We're going to be introducing a new face to do live reporting on this channel every week. So it's not just going to be me. As I've said, we're trying to build a much bigger empire here. 200 watching. Yes. Thank you to all 200. Press the share button. Let's get this out. So all I got to say, the real collusion was between the Democratic Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign. I am so sick and tired of hearing about Russian trolls. I did a story yesterday. The Pentagon says Russian trolls have increased 2,000% since the Syria airstrikes. What's the evidence, you ask? We'll tell you later. It's absurd. So I wanted to bring that to you because I think it's so important. Now we see directly from Ed Schultz, who got fired after he got moved from 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock after being one of the most popular hosts, highest rated hosts. He gets bumped out of 8 o'clock. Then he gets fired at 5 o'clock, still has good ratings, but because he was against the TPP. He goes up to Vermont. He's got a camera crew with him, producers, editors, the whole nine. That's not cheap to send crews out. I've worked for cable news. The president calls him, "You are not to cover Bernie Sanders." This is state-run media. I don't think RT is the threat. I think MSNBC and CNN is the threat. I don't even bother with Fox News. Of course they're terrible and propaganda. But let's stop. Like my aunt, who I love, if you're watching, Aunt Debbie, I love her. She lives in Massachusetts. She's very progressive and politico, and we talk sometimes on the phone, and I see her once in a blue moon. She loves Rachel Maddow, and I keep having to educate her. Rachel Maddow is a propagandist now. She's making 30 grand a day. Aunt Debbie, I love you, but stop the madness. And Aunt Debbie just subscribed to my Patreon, so I love you even more now. So from one corrupt story about MSNBC to another, because I got two today. I got two. Thank you, Jake, who just pledged $2. Thanks so much, Jake. I got one more story about how stupid and hypocritical and corrupt MSNBC is. Can you handle one more? I know it's tough to swallow, but I got one more. You're not going to hear this in many places. And I have to give the credit. To Jen, my business partner. She did bring this to my attention today. Sometimes I miss tweets. I've been trying to get investors, progressive investors. We're not taking money from the plutocrats of the Democratic Party, but I've been trying to get investors to launch this company and get back in the field. So Chuck Todd tweeted something very interesting today. Chuck Todd tweeted something very, very interesting today. You ready? Okay. Going to find out what kind of organization Fox is today. No serious news organization would allow someone this conflicted to cover this story. So he's talking about, there's been this hubbubaloo for the last 2 days because it came out that Sean Hannity, the premier propagandist at Fox News, he was a client of Michael Cohen, who is President Trump's personal lawyer. Cohen said Hannity was a client. Hannity says, I'm not a client. I just got legal advice, but I never paid him. Who knows? Who cares? If Fox were to fire Sean Hannity, I'd do jumping jacks. I mean, Sean Hannity is terrible. He's a terrible... But at least with Sean Hannity, I have to say, you know what you're getting. He's not, you're getting a Republican press release every night. And you're getting a Trump mouthpiece every night. So at least there's truth there. You know what you're getting. I mean, everything he does is a lie. But like Sean Hannity, it's propaganda, but at least they're not trying to pretend to be neutral, right? In prime time, they're not. During the day, Fox pretends to be fair and balanced, please. And I hope my parents are watching this because my father loves Sean Hannity. Terrible. So I just want to read that again to you, what Chuck Todd said. Chuck Todd, the moderator of Beat the Press, said, we're going to find out what kind of organization Fox is today. No serious news organization would allow someone this conflicted to cover this story. And he's talking about, will Fox take action against Sean Hannity? It came out this afternoon. Fox said, we've investigated it. We've looked into Sean Hannity's relationship with Michael Cohen, and we've concluded that there's no problem, and we support Sean Hannity. Not a surprise. Sean Hannity's, I think, their highest rated guy now. So, whatever. So, Jen sent me this tweet, and I immediately remembered that Chuck Todd is a big fucking hypocrite. And Chuck Todd has conflicts of interest up the wazoo. Up the wazoo. And Chuck Todd, honestly, it's a joke that he is given every Sunday morning to basically be a stenographer for the establishment and to host other stenographers in the press for the establishment. So what is Chuck Todd's conflict of interest? And I hate to say it, that I have to show this because it's from the Daily Caller, but sometimes you got to show normally bad publications because sometimes they'll be the only one that covers certain things. So this is from the Daily Caller. Chuck Todd hosted swanky dinner party at his home for top Clinton campaign official. Meet the Press host Chuck Todd and his wife, a Democratic consultant, I don't think he consults that on his show. I don't think he discloses that on his show. His wife, Democratic consultant, and he hosted a dinner party at their Washington, D.C. area home last year for Jennifer Palmieri, Hillary Clinton's communications director. An invitation for the shindig was sent on July 11th, 2015. Hillary Clinton was already a declared candidate. To John Podesta, Clinton's campaign chairman. Podesta's hacked emails have been released online by WikiLeaks. The party, which also involved a cocktail hour, was thrown for Palmieri and her husband, Jim Lyons. And here is the invitation. I mean, personally, Chuck, I think you could have done a better invitation. This is a little lacking. Is that supposed to be a flower or a planet? I don't know what that's supposed to be. It looks kind of weird to me. But you got Chuck Todd, Christian Denny, I guess that's his wife, invite you for cocktails and dinner in honor of Jennifer and Jim. Oh my God, it was on my birthday. September 20th, my birthday. How come I wasn't invited, Chuck? I don't like that, Chuck Todd. On my birthday, you're hosting the campaign communications chairwoman for Hillary Clinton when you're pretending to cover the campaign neutrally. So, Todd's wife, Christian Kenny Todd, was at the time a consultant for former Virginia Senator Jim Webb, one of Clinton's challengers. The invite is just a latest glaring example of the cozy relationship between mainstream journalists and the Clinton campaign. So, I mean, I take it you're not shocked at this. I'm not shocked at this. But what's so interesting, and I think you don't get to see it, and frankly, I wanted to show it more when I was at the Young Turks, but wasn't able to for a lot of different reasons. So when I was on the campaign trail and I would cover Trump rallies or Clinton rallies, I mean, you'd have the back of the rally would be the press. You'd have a stage where the press goes. You have their cameras are set up on the stage. Their satellite equipment, all this stuff. So, and all I would see is literally MSNBC, CNN, and broadcast reporters slobbering over Clinton and Trump campaign staffers. I mean, they were sitting there giggling and laughing with each other, and it was like they were talking about, just recounting the night before, taking lemon drop shots at the cocktail party. I rarely at these campaign events actually talk to anyone from the campaigns, because when I covered the campaign, I wasn't doing it to get access with the campaigns. I was doing it to interview real people and show you what actual people are going out, rather than to just interview people who work for campaigns and have them just regurgitate talking points, which is all CNN and MSNBC do. And in the few interviews I had with campaign staffers, I challenged them as best as I could. But that's the backdrop. You have Chuck Todd, who's tweeting about how Fox News should take action against Sean Hannity. By the way, completely agree. I think Sean Hannity should be gone from media. I think he's terrible. He's a propagandist. But the lack of self-awareness, because Chuck Todd knows that 99.9% of the media is not going to call him out. Chuck Todd knows that it's not like Brian Stelter at CNN cares that Chuck Todd is having a cocktail party in the honor of Jennifer Palmieri, Hillary Clinton's communications chairwoman. We're not talking about a volunteer for Hillary Clinton's campaign. We're talking about probably the second most powerful people in her campaign. And the anchor of Meet the Press at the time, the moderator of Meet the Press, literally held a dinner in her honor at his home. First of all, that would get the majority of real journalists I know fired if they did that. But at MSNBC, totally fine, totally welcome. As I showed you, you have a Comcast vice president who literally hosted a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton. That would get them fired. But it's not like Chuck Todd put that as a disclaimer before segments he did on Hillary Clinton. It's not like Chuck Todd put that as a disclaimer before segments he did on Bernie Sanders. Of course not. And Chuck Todd on Meet the Press on Sundays, I mean, I watch it so you don't have to. Part of my Patreon, patreon.com/Jordan Sheridan Reports, I do a weekly podcast called Beat the Press, where I beat the hell out of the press. And I show you the lies and the conflicts of interest. I watch corporate media so you don't have to. It's a public service. But literally, you have the moderator of Meet the Press. I think Meet the Press gets like between 4 and 5 million viewers on Sunday morning. It's a lot of viewers. Hosting circle jerk parties for the communications chairwoman. Can you imagine if, I don't know, Cenk Uygur at the Young Turks hosted like a dinner? Well, actually, that wouldn't matter because he's a commentator. But can you imagine if, like, I don't know, I hosted a party at my house in the honor of Bernie Sanders and I never revealed it, and like my email was hacked and it came out and I was standing there on the campaign trail? I would be exposed, and the media and the Neera Tanden crowd and the Democratic establishment would be coming after me like hyenas. But Chuck Todd, nope. You have parties for Hillary Clinton's campaign officials. You then have them on your show. Chuck Todd has interviewed Jennifer Palmieri. He doesn't disclose that. And the reason is because corporate media is not media. It is public relations for the government. It is public relations for the establishment. It is public relations for the status quo. That's why we're launching Status Coup. Good segue, right? Corporate media is the status quo. That's why we need a status coup. Thank you very much. And for those of you talking about TYT and Cenk, I kindly say life is short and I am moving forward. So I am not going to comment on my former employer. However, I feel there is a void, a large void, that real stories and real corruption are not being covered. I have a lot of friends that still work at TYT. God bless them. But I will say I think there's a large void outside of the Trump-Russia media industrial complex. There's a very, very large void that's not being covered. So there you have it. Chuck Todd, total hypocrite, total fraud. And frankly, you know what? If Chuck Todd wants to be a Hillary Clinton cheerleader, if he wants to host parties at his house for her campaign chairwoman, if he wants to, if Comcast wants to host fundraisers for Hillary Clinton, that's fine. Just disclose it. Disclose it. Say, we are the network of the Democratic Party. We are the network of the Democratic establishment. We are not a progressive network. So as Chuck Todd and CNN criticize Fox News for being frauds and not being honest with their viewers, they're guilty of the same thing. They're guilty of the same thing. So, moving on to a really important story that I wish I could get back in the field to cover. Speaking of, get back in the field to cover it. So if you remember when I was at the Young Turks, obviously I covered the St. Louis protests. There were protests in St. Louis for over a month. Another black man was murdered by police on tape. The police officer was recorded saying, "I'm going to kill this motherfucker, you watch." And then he killed him. But while I was in St. Louis, I took a detour and I covered a nuclear waste site. There is a nuclear waste site right kind of like outside of St. Louis, but St. Louis area. That is from the Manhattan Project days. It's got uranium underground. Hi from Scotland. Love you, Darth Bong. Love you, Darth Bong. Love that name, too. It's got a nuclear waste site, and right near that nuclear waste site is an underground methane fire. An underground methane fire. So I went there when I was at the Young Turks. I actually put on the mask the wrong way from what I remember, but I had a mask on. I went to the nuclear waste site. I mean, the smell from that could literally, if I stood out there for another hour, bad things were going to happen. Ty, my cameraman, was like, let's get the fuck out of here. Much love to Ty. So you got a nuclear waste site. The EPA has not even really measured how close the nuclear waste site is to a methane fire. And yes, HBO did a documentary on it. It was a good documentary. So literally, you got this, literally, if these two collide, this nuclear waste site and a chemical fire underground, you could have a mini nuclear explosion, because this is nuclear waste from the Manhattan Project days. It's not a joke. So many people don't know this because the corporate media doesn't cover these things, but Bill Gates, that bastion of Microsoft and Bill Gates, he gives all his money to charity and he does such great things. Well, behind every, wonderful philanthropist is a little bit of corruption. Well, Bill Gates owned the company. Bill Gates owns the company that owns the nuclear waste site. And roll with me for a second. I just gotta get up and charge my computer before we die here. In the media revolution, we do things live. La-da-dee, la-da-da. What will be, will be.